All right, we are now broadcasting. We're going to make sure we've got all of our equipment right, all of our ingredients right. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself in the chat, and if you would like to do the same, we would love to be able to say hi to you. If you want to say your name, if you want to include your age, or where you are viewing from, we would love to be able to say hi as we're getting ready. We'll give everyone kind of just a minute to file in, and we will get started in just a moment. Looks like you're getting your stuff ready over there, Max. That's good. Got my stuff over here. This is going to be a really fun one. Hi there, Alexander. Hi there, Fletcher. Hi there, Dorothy Sue. Hi, Archer. And hi, Ariane. Hi there, Sarah and Hannah. Hi there, Gaia. Hi there, Caleb. Hi there, Alexa. Hi there, Emily. We'll get ready to get started here in just a second because we're right here at 10 o'clock, which is where we start. Yeah, I think, friends, let's go ahead and get started with our experiment today. So in Little Lab today, we are going to be talking about using ingredients to put stuff to put together to create new things. And specifically, we're starting today talking about bread. Max, are you ready to talk about bread?
Oh, excuse me. I didn't see you there. Sorry, everybody. I'm just taking a bite out of some of my homemade bread that I made last night. I'm going to take another bite.
So you made some bread at home.
Mm-hmm.
That looks really good. Can you guys tell me what you know about bread? Oh, we have someone asking if you brought enough to share. Do you think you can share with everyone? Whoa, we have a whole beautiful loaf of bread there. What do you guys know about bread? What does it taste like or feel like or smell like? What do you notice about bread? Ooh, we say it has wheat in it. It does have wheat in it. That is a great thing to mention. We're going to be talking about that wheat and its ingredients. What else? Is it hard or soft? Is it heavier, light? Are there different kinds of bread? What do you think? It can be white. That's true. There's white breads, there's whole wheat breads, there's flat breads, there's really flaky breads. It's soft. I think a lot of times, yeah, I think about bread as being something that's soft. Although some are hard. Sometimes it has a hard crust. That's a really good thing to bring up.
These are excellent things to bring up. I'm loving this.
You can make a sandwich with it. That's true.
Good point. Love that.
You can make all kinds of things with bread. What is bread itself made of?
That's such a good question, Peregrine. And for parents, this is a really important early childhood science process skill, is thinking about things as the sum of their ingredients or things being made up of component parts. So yeah, what is bread made up of?
We have someone again saying wheat. Yeah, we think that wheat is in bread, right? That is definitely an ingredient in some breads. Some breads can use other kinds of grains as well. What else? Ooh, Herdai says yeast. Yeast too. And flour. Ooh. Let's talk about the three main ingredients of bread. So our first ingredient in bread is flour. And we all have some flour here today. I'm going to get mine a little bit closer. And we'll talk about the specifics of flour in just a moment, but that's one of our ingredients. We need flour. We also need water. Water is another ingredient we need to make the dough that we will use to make bread. So we have some water here. And then there's one more ingredient. We actually had some friends mention it. We want to include yeast in our bread. And this is kind of the most basic recipe for bread. We can include lots of other different things to make different types, but as long as we have flour, water, and yeast, we can make bread. We know kind of that the flour and water mix together to make a dough, but what is yeast and what does it do? Do you guys have any ideas? What does yeast do? I have some here in a jar. I have some yeast in a jar. What does it look like to you guys? Looks kind of like sand to me.
Looks kind of like fish food to me.
It does kind of look like fish food, I would agree. We have someone saying that yeast blows it up. It makes the dough rise. It's the rising agent. Oh, I love that, you guys. That is perfect. So yeast is something that helps the dough become larger because it's filling it with bubbles of air. Kind of like if I were to blow bubbles in my water. I used a straw to put air in mine, but we're going to use yeast in ours. The yeast likes to eat the ingredients and it produces bubbles of gas that make our bread nice and fluffy. Let's go back to our flour ingredient and we'll talk a little bit about that. Max, when we say flour, we don't mean this type of flour, right?
No, we don't. It's spelled just a little bit differently and it comes from a different kind of plant. Some folks have already told us what kind of plant flour comes from. Does anybody know what plant that is? Oh, somebody said it. It comes from wheat. And when we're talking about yeast and about flour, Peregrine showed us a type of yeast you can buy in a store. Today, our experiment together is going to turn your kitchen into a test kitchen because yeast, along with being in that little jar, is also all around us right now. So everybody, all together, take a deep breath. There is yeast, that fungus, floating around in the air all around us. It's on me, it's on my cats, it's on my TV, it's everywhere. And the type of bread we're going to be making today doesn't use the yeast that we would buy from a store like Peregrine has. Instead, what we're going to do together today is make a nice little home for yeast. Sometimes we call these sourdough starters. So you can see here, all of those little bubbles are caused by yeast living in my little sourdough starter, which is a teeny tiny little home that I made to help me make sourdough bread that is made of really, really simple ingredients. Those ingredients, again, just being flour and water. So let's go back to talking just about flour. I'm going to switch over to my experiment, Cam. Does that sound good to you, Peregrine?
That sounds perfect.
Okay, experiment, Cam. So parents, there are a few different types of flours. In fact, there's a lot of different types of flours that you can use to make a sourdough starter if you're doing that with us today. If you're just here to play with flour and water, then that's also totally cool. If you want to make a sourdough starter, you can pretty much use any type of flour, including gluten-free flour. The one type that you can't use to make a sourdough starter is self-rising flour because it has baking soda. It already has a leavening agent in it. So today I have a little bit of this one right here, which is all-purpose, and then I have a little bit of bread flour, and further over this way, I've got some other types of flours that I'll be playing with. One of my favorite things about flour, though, is that it's a fascinating material to just explore with your hands. So let's start by doing that. If you have a bowl or a little bit of flour, now is a good opportunity for us to just kind of explore it, to pick it up and move it around in your hands a little bit.
I'm poking.
This will, of course, be a little bit of a messy activity, which is why I have a towel nearby and I also have a vacuum cleaner nearby. But you can see I'm moving it through my hands. You can shake your hands and see what happens then. What happens to the flour? One thing that I really, really love, and that builds an early science process skill, is trying to build flour balls just in your hands. So squeezing them until you get a flour ball. And then it falls apart. Let's try it again. Everybody try to make a flour ball. So we're going to pick up a little bit of flour, and we're just going to squeeze it in our hands as tight as we can. And now we've got it, but it doesn't stick around for very long. It falls back apart. this is a really, really good type of play that in young children helps to build predictions about what might happen, but is also good cause and effect play, because you can start thinking about questions like, why is this happening? Why won't my flour ball stick together? Why does it fall back apart and then just go back into this bowl filled with powdery flour here? What else can we do with our flour, Peregrine?
We could put our flour into different kinds of holding containers. Like I put some flour in a bag so that I could squeeze it around, and it's kind of a different sensory experience when we do that. There's lots of things I could do to it, like make it flat, or I could put some more air into my bag and shake it around and kind of see how that flour behaves. If you guys are doing any of this experiment along with us at home, what do you notice about your flour? What do you think? I was poking mine earlier to see if I could make little craters in it.
Ooh, that's fun.
That feels kind of nice in my hand. I noticed that flour is very fine. It's in teeny, teeny, tiny grains. Ooh, we have Monique saying that we can make handprints in it. We can make handprints in it. That's a great observation. So it kind of keeps a shape if we press that shape into it. I love that.
One thing and another early science process skill we can do is measuring. I have a bunch of good measurement tools like my teaspoons, my tablespoons, my parts of cups, but then I also just have some regular spoons, and I also brought this teeny tiny little spoon that maybe I've just totally misplaced. No, here it is. So let's start with this teeny tiny little spoon. And to get an accurate measurement, you just want the spoon part filled up. So with the rest of it, use your finger to slide the rest off so you've just got a nice top there. Then with that, let's try to move the flour into another vessel. Let's try to dump it out. There's not very much in this tiny little spoon, right? So let's get something bigger. What if I use this spoon? Let's try that one. So something that's a little bit bigger. And then again, I'm using my measurement trick to level off the top. And then I'm gonna put that one in there. That's not too much either. So let's try another one. What about this big one? Okay, this one is gonna be really important because this is my third of a cup. And this is another good way to do some early math play is thinking about ratios and about measurements. I'm gonna level it off by just pushing the rest off. And you can see I've got a nice flat surface there. And let's see if that's more. Oh my goodness, there's a whole lot more flour there. So I'm just gonna keep playing a little bit with leveling off some flour and moving it into some different vessels. But I think it's time for us to explore our second ingredient in our sourdough starter. So while I keep measuring off and moving some flour around, which I encourage all of you to do too, Peregrine, what's our second ingredient for our sourdough starter again?
So if you guys remember, you can put it in the chat. We want to make sure that we have not only flour, but water to start making our dough. I'm going to switch to my experiment cam as well. So I'm switching over here. You can see my table is all nice and covered in flour. And I'm going to use this big bowl here. And I'm going to put a little bit of flour in it, and then I'm going to add different amounts of water to kind of see what it does, right? So water is pretty different than flour, right? What do you guys think? I think that water is pretty different. Can you tell me how water is different than flour? What do you think? They both feel kind of soft in my hand. Ooh, it's kind of more, it has a little bit more movement in it. It's a liquid. That's exactly right, Zora. Water is a liquid and flour is a solid. So I'm going to take my solid material and I'm going to add some liquid. So I've added 3 of these spoonfuls of my solid. I can also add 3 spoonfuls of my liquid. There's 1. There's 2, and there's 3. Now, they're not very mixed up together, so we will need to mix them up. You can use a mixing spoon like this one. You can use a tiny whisk, or you can even use your hands. Should I use my spoon, my whisk, or my hands? What do you guys think? This is just for our experiment. Which one do you want to see me use? We think maybe the tiny whisk. I think this tiny whisk is pretty cool.
I'm going to use my hands.
I have a vote for each one. Let's see if we can have a tiebreaker. We have one person saying whisk, one saying spoon, one saying hands. We have one more vote for hand, so we will use hand. I'm going to take my finger and just stir it up. This is great because I can feel how it feels and how it becomes different when I start to mix it up. Look at this. When I started to mix it up, it became kind of sticky. I think that I have the beginnings of my dough. But do you think that I have enough water? What do you think?
Peregrine, I use not very much water, and mine is not very sticky, but I do have some of these like weird things dripping down from it that I think are kind of cool.
Ooh.
Why do you think ours are different? Why is mine not very sticky, but it is sort of sticking together now?
What do we think? I think that it might be due to the amount of water and the amount of flour.
Now that I'm trying to make my flour ball again, it's not falling apart. It's staying together. Oh, but then it does fall apart a little bit later. At home, one thing you can try to do is play with a bunch of different ratios, which is a word for how much water and how much flour. Depending on the ratio, how much water you put into your flour, you might start getting something like a dough, kind of like what I have. Or if you put a lot of water and not as much flour, you might get something more like a batter, kind of like what Peregrine has. And even though both of these are moving towards being bread, one really important thing for us to talk about here is that we're not going to eat anything that we're making together today. You might eat something like it later on once you're done cooking and preparing it, but we're not going to eat anything that we're making in our test kitchen today. Right, Peregrine?
I agree. It wouldn't taste very good either. So we have started to create our different kinds of dough. But if we want to start making bread at home, we want kind of a different amount, right? We want a different ratio of flour and water. Once we have that mixture of flour and water, we can make that home for yeast that we were talking about. Can we see what yours looks like again, Max?
Sure. My hands are covered in flour, but I'm going to try to switch my camera over one last time to experiment cam.
Can we see
There
what
we
yours
go.
looks like?
Okay, so I've got one that has a ratio with a lot of flour and not very much water. And that one kind of feels like dough. I can move it, I can squish it, I can probably build stuff out of it. That is really fun. I can't wait to explore this one more. I have another one that I'm mixing right now that is mostly water. And that one is still pretty watery. It's kind of more like a gravy, which I think is pretty cool. And I'm excited to play with this one more too and mix it up in my hands. But to make a sourdough starter, and this is our last thing we'll be doing together today in Little Lab, my friends, we want you to either choose the one that you've made that feels the most like it has the same amount of flour and water. So which one feels like it has the same amount of water as it does flour? If you don't have one that feels like that, and you only have two that are kind of like mine, that are, you know, one that's kind of like dough and one that's kind of like gravy, now is a good chance to make one. And you can do that using those measurement skills that we talked about. You can level off an amount of flour and put it into a container. And you don't need to level off, luckily, an amount of water, because any amount of water that goes over is just going to spill over. Then you add that to your mixture and you mix it up. Believe it or not, these are all of the solid or tangible ingredients that you need to start your sourdough starter. But there's one more ingredient that's really important. And that last ingredient is time. It takes a little bit of time for the yeast that's all around us to find its way in here and to start eating up this little house that you've made for it. So now that I've got this nice mixture here, that's the same amount of flour and water, I can move that into a little container, and I can just pour mine, because that's how the consistency for this type of flour is. And then I leave it with its lid open and let the yeast find its way in. After just a few days, and during that time you'll still have to feed it a little bit more flour and a little bit more water, you'll start to notice those bubbles, and eventually it'll start kind of looking like my sourdough starter here, which is also just flour and water. We can use that later down the road to make sourdough bread. We're going to leave you with a few extra resources that you can use to help feed your sourdough starter, to help feed the yeast that's going to be living in your little yeast home here. And using that, if you follow those directions together, which following a set of directions or following a recipe is another great science process skill, you can also begin to observe not only the bubbles inside of your starter in just a couple of days, but you'll be able to use another excellent sense to observe that. And that's going to be your sense of smell. It'll start to smell all sorts of different ways. And one thing that I think is really cool is that no sourdough starters smell totally alike. They are going to smell slightly different based off of what kinds of yeast are already living in your home. Okay, I'm going to try to switch my camera back, but my hands, as you can see, are just covered in batter and flour. So we'll see if I'm even able to.
So we're saying that we've used water, we've used flour to make a little home for yeast. And the yeast is coming from all around us. Though we could use yeast from a jar to make kind of a different kind of bread, we don't even need that ingredient because the yeast is all around us, and it will see that we have made a nice home for it with lots of things for it to eat, and it will come and it will live in here. We won't be able to see it, but we will be able to see the effects of it living here. Those effects are going to be those bubbles. They're going to be that different smell that we'll smell over a couple of days. But yeah, that it takes a little bit of time.
And time is such an important ingredient for bakers and for scientists.
We have some really good questions in the chat about kind of the different ratios for making a starter, and we will send that information to you in writing so that you have all of those step-by-step procedures to make a starter to invite all of that yeast in. And we have someone who mentioned also using vinegar, and we are going to be using vinegar next week when we do another activity that involves a little bit of yeast as well, the yeast that's all around us. So we've talked a little bit about how we can start making bread, right, over time. We've talked about a bunch of different ingredients that we can use in different kinds of experiments, right, different kinds of measuring, different kinds of sensory and texture experiences. We can do some simple math with it. And of course, we know that we can attract a little bit of yeast to make a baking project in a couple of days. So I hope that you all can build your own starter and observe, see what happens to it over the next several days. And we could check in about it next week. We're going to talk again about another kind of yeast project, and that's going to involve that vinegar that we mentioned. And I hope that we can hear from you about what your sourdough starter home has started to look like. But that's all the time we have for today. We actually went a little bit over, so thank you all for hanging out with us today. We are so excited to do a little lab with you all. We love hearing from you. Thank you so much for participating in the chat, and we look forward to doing more kitchen experiments with you next week. Same day, same time, Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Thank you all so much for your time today.
Thanks, everybody. This was fun.